The Nexus station trembled as
That's
another ship
Vexalia
docked
the
at Port
Render.
7. Captain Marcus
Sweet,
Chen
merciful
barely
boy.
looked up from his
The
maintenance
Nexus
reports,
station
though the
trembled as
distinctive
another ship
violet
docked
glow
at Port
seeping
7.
through
The
the
cantina
viewport
fell
made his
silent
stomach
as the
clench.
airlock hissed
Kytherin
open.
vessel.
The story said she'd
He'd
been
recognize
banished from
that
the Hive
energy
Worlds for
signature
being too
anywhere.
violent.
The cantina
What's she
fell
doing
silent as the airlock hissed open. Even the Zalakri traders, notorious for their aggressive haggling,
they did not.
suddenly found their drinks
You will leave.
fascinating.
You will tell your
Marcus
cartel
watched
that
through the
humans under my
grimy
protection
window
are not
as a
to be
figure
touched.
emerged from
You
the
have
ship's
names?
shadow. She stood nearly 9 feet tall, her obsidian exoskeleton gleaming under the station's harsh lights. 4 arms moved with predatory grace, each ending in claws that could slice through battle-grade armor like tissue paper. The Kytheran's head swept slowly across the docking bay, compound eyes scanning for threats with the patience of an apex predator. 2 rows of serrated teeth caught the light as her mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or hunger. "Sweet, merciful void," whispered Jake Morrison, Marcus's engineer, sliding into the booth across from him. "That's Vexalia the Render." Marcus nearly choked on his synthetic coffee. Every spacer in 3 sectors knew that name. Vexalia had single-handedly torn apart a hegemony battlecruiser with nothing but her natural weapons and raw fury. She'd hunted slavers across the Outer Rim for decades, leaving behind nothing but twisted metal and horrified survivors who spoke of her in whispers. The Kytheran were apex predators before they'd ever reached the stars. Evolution had crafted them as perfect killing machines on a world where everything else had evolved to be nearly unkillable. When they'd finally achieved spaceflight, the galaxy had learned to fear the clicking sound of their mandibles. But Vexalia was something else entirely. Even other Kytheran gave her a wide berth. She was exile, outcast, wanderer. The story said she'd been banished from the Hive Worlds for being too violent, too unpredictable. If that was true, Marcus didn't want to imagine what kind of carnage would earn such a reputation among a species already known for their brutality. "What's she doing here?" Jake muttered, unconsciously touching the plasma pistol at his hip. Marcus was wondering the same thing. Nexus Station was a backwater trading post on the edge of nowhere, barely worth the fuel to reach it. The kind of place where smugglers, refugees, and other desperate souls gathered to lick their wounds and plan their next moves. Not exactly the hunting grounds for a legendary predator. The answer came sooner than he'd expected. Through the cantina's entrance stumbled a group of Terran merchants, their expensive clothes torn and faces pale with exhaustion. Behind them came a squad of hulking Brugar slavers, their ceremonial chains and brands marking them as members of the Crimson Tide cartel. "Please," gasped the lead merchant, a middle-aged woman with graying hair. "We paid your boss everything we had." The contract said safe passage to the inner colonies. The largest Brugar, his hide scarred from countless battles, laughed with the sound of grinding stone. "Contract expired when market prices changed, human. Fresh Terran slaves bring premium coin on Vectoth Prime. Your cargo hold looks spacious enough for proper transport cages." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this before too many times. Pirates and slavers loved targeting human merchants because Earth's government was too far away and too bureaucratic to mount effective rescue operations. Humans were seen as soft, weak, easy prey scattered across the galaxy without the protection of a unified military force. "The Galactic Trade Commission will hear about this," the woman said, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in her voice. "The Commission has no jurisdiction in the Outer Rim," the Brugar replied, raising his shock lance. "Now move, or we start with the young ones." That's when Vexalia moved. Marcus had heard about Kytheran combat speed, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. One moment she was standing motionless in the docking bay. The next she was behind the rear Brugar, all 4 arms moving in perfect coordination. The first Brugar died before he realized he was under attack. Vexalia's primary claws punched through his spine while her secondary arms gripped his skull and twisted until something vital snapped. The second managed to turn around before her tail blade opened his throat in a spray of blue blood. The leader spun toward the commotion, shock lance crackling with energy, only to find himself staring into compound eyes that reflected no mercy whatsoever. "You hunt humans," Vexalia said, her voice carrying the distinctive clicking undertones of her species. Each word was precisely pronounced, as if she was still learning Galactic Standard. "This displeases me." The Brugar's courage evaporated. Even his species, known for their aggression and pride, recognized a superior predator when they saw one. The Crimson Tide has territorial rights here, Kitharin. These humans violated our space. No, Vexalia replied simply. They did not. She moved again. The Brugger's shock lance clattered to the deck, along with the arm that had been holding it. He howled and stumbled backward, clutching the spurting stump. You will leave, she continued conversationally, as if she hadn't just crippled a being twice her mass. You will tell your cartel that humans under my protection are not to be touched. You will spread word that Vexalia the Render watches over these particular prey. The surviving Brugars didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their wounded leader and fled toward their ship, leaving behind their dead and their dignity. The human merchants stood frozen, unsure whether they'd been saved or simply acquired by a more dangerous predator. Vexalia studied them for a long moment, her head tilting at an angle that suggested curiosity rather than hunger. You have names? She asked. The lead merchant swallowed hard. Sarah Chen. These are my children, David and Lisa, and my business partners. Chen. Vexalia repeated the name carefully. Human family designation. You trade in what goods? Medical supplies, Sarah managed. Antibiotics, surgical equipment. Things the Outer Rim colonies need but can't produce themselves. Something shifted in Vexalia's posture. The predatory stillness remained, but there was something else now. Interest, perhaps, or approval. Show me your ship, she said. Marcus found himself following the group across the docking bay, drawn by morbid curiosity and a strange feeling that he was witnessing something historically significant. The Chen family's vessel was a converted cargo hauler, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts and patched with whatever materials they could afford. Nothing fancy, but well-maintained and obviously loved. Vexalia examined the ship's manifest while Sarah explained their route and cargo. Medical supplies for refugee camps. Antibiotics for a plague-stricken mining colony. Surgical equipment for a frontier hospital that had been bombed by raiders. You profit from this trade? Vexalia asked. Barely, Sarah admitted. We charge enough to keep the ship running and our crew fed. Most colonies can't afford market prices for medical supplies. The Kitharin was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Marcus could practically see her reconsidering everything she thought she knew about human nature. On most worlds, trade meant exploitation. The strong took from the weak. Survival demanded ruthless self-interest, and mercy was a luxury that got you killed. But here were humans risking their lives and fortunes to bring healing to strangers, asking for barely enough payment to survive. Your species confuses me, Vexalia said finally. Humans are weak, small, fragile, yet you venture into dangerous space to aid those who cannot aid themselves. This is not logical predator behavior. Sarah managed a small smile. We're not predators, we're just trying to help. All species are predators, Vexalia replied automatically, then paused. Are they not? Some are, Sarah said carefully. But we've found that cooperation often works better than competition. When we help others, they help us in return. When we heal instead of harm, we build something stronger than what we could create alone. Marcus watched Vexalia process this concept, her compound eyes reflecting the station's lights like fractured mirrors. For a being raised in a culture where might made right and only the strong survived, the idea of voluntary altruism must have been as alien as her appearance was to humans. Your medical supplies, she said abruptly. They could treat Kitharin physiology? Sarah blinked in surprise. Some of them, yes. Universal antibiotics, surgical tools, basic diagnostic equipment. Why? Instead of answering, Vexalia turned and walked toward her own ship. The sleek vessel seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, its hull covered in what looked like organic armor plating. As the airlock cycled open, Marcus caught a glimpse of the interior. Dark, cramped, designed for a solitary hunter rather than crew comfort. She returned carrying a metal case that looked like it had been through several wars. Setting it down carefully, she opened it, to reveal rows of crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. Kytheran pain gems, she said, grown in the deep hives, each one worth more than your entire cargo. They block neural pathways, eliminate suffering during medical procedures. Your human physicians could use these to save many lives. Sarah stared at the gems, clearly recognizing their value. We couldn't possibly afford— Not purchase, Vexalia interrupted. Trade. You carry my gems to those who need them. In return, I accompany your ship. I guard your cargo, your crew, your mission. You want to help us deliver medical supplies? Sarah asked, incredulous. I want to understand, Vexalia replied. Your species does things that make no sense to a hunter. Perhaps traveling with you will provide answers. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what he was witnessing. The most feared predator in 3 sectors was proposing to become a protector, a guardian. And not for conquest or profit, but out of sheer curiosity about human nature. The implications were staggering. With Vexalia's protection, the Chen family could reach colonies that had been cut off by pirate activity for years. They could deliver supplies to places where other traders feared to venture. And word would spread quickly that humans had somehow earned the loyalty of a legend. There's one condition, Sarah said slowly. Vexalia's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You dare to set conditions for the render? On my ship, we don't solve problems by killing people unless there's absolutely no other choice. Sarah said firmly. Violence is the last resort, not the first. Can you accept that? The Kithaeron stood motionless for so long that Marcus wondered if she'd gone into some kind of hibernation state. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note he'd never heard from her species before. Uncertainty. I am a weapon, she said. Forged by evolution, honed by exile, perfected by necessity. To ask me not to kill is to ask the void not to be dark. I'm not asking you not to defend us, Sarah clarified. I'm asking you to try other solutions first. Sometimes the threat of violence is enough. Sometimes negotiation works. Sometimes people can be reasoned with. And when reason fails, Sarah's expression hardened. Then you do whatever is necessary to protect innocent lives. Vexalia considered this for another long moment. Then, in a gesture that would have seemed impossible minutes before, she lowered herself into what Marcus realized was a bow. I accept your terms, Sarah Chen. I will learn your human ways of solving problems. In return, you will teach me why your species chooses to heal rather than harm. As Marcus watched the most feared predator in the galaxy pledge herself to a human family of medical traders, he realized that the balance of power in the Outer Rim had just shifted in ways that nobody could have predicted. The universe was about to discover that humans had somehow accomplished something that armies and empires had failed to achieve. They had tamed the untamable, not through force or fear, but through simple compassion and the offer of understanding. And that was perhaps the most terrifying development of all. 3 weeks after leaving Nexus Station, the cargo ship Hippocrates dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge watching the stellar cartography display paint a picture of devastation that made her stomach turn. Where the mining colony of New Prosperity should have been thriving, emergency beacons painted the void in urgent red. Debris clouds marked the graves of cargo ships that had tried to run the pirate blockade. And there, hanging in space like a mechanical parasite, was the source of the colony's suffering, a massive battle station bristling with weapons and fighter bays. Corsair Fortress, David Chen observed grimly from the communication station. Looks like they've been here for months. Sarah's son was barely 22, but 3 years of running medical supplies through the Outer Rim had aged him beyond his years. His sister Lisa, working the sensor station, was even younger but carried herself with the same determined competence that had become the Chen family trademark. Reading multiple destroyer-class escorts, Lisa reported. At least 30 fighters on patrol. They've got the whole system locked down tight. From the engineering station where she'd been quietly observing, Vexalia rose to her full height. The past 3 weeks had been a revelation for both species. The Kithaeron had watched human crew dynamics with the fascination of an anthropologist, while the humans had slowly grown accustomed to sharing their space with a being that could tear apart battle-grade armor with her bare claws. This is why you needed protection, Vexalia observed, studying the tactical display. Your species ventures into spaces where others fear to tread. The colony has been cut off for 6 months, Sarah explained, pulling up the medical reports they'd received before departing. plague outbreak started in the deep mines. Without fresh antibiotics and surgical supplies, they're looking at a complete population collapse within weeks. Vexalia's compound eyes reflected the display's glow as she processed the tactical situation. The pirates know this. They wait for desperation to drive up ransom prices. Probably, Sarah agreed, but we're not paying ransoms. Then how do you propose to reach the colony? The question hung in the air as the human crew exchanged glances. This was the part of their mission that had kept Sarah awake for the past week. Running medical supplies to friendly ports was one thing. Breaking a military blockade was something else entirely. We could try transmitting our medical credentials, David suggested. Sometimes pirates have families on the colonies they're blockading. Or we could attempt a stealth approach through the asteroid field, Lisa added. Hippocrates isn't exactly built for speed, but she's small enough to hide among the rocks. Vexalia listened to these suggestions with the patience of a predator studying prey behavior. When the humans fell silent, she stepped closer to the tactical display. You think like prey animals, she said, not unkindly. Always seeking to avoid confrontation, to find paths around obstacles rather than through them. Because we're not fighters, Sarah replied. We're healers. Violence isn't our first. I understand your prohibition against killing, Vexalia interrupted, but you misunderstand the nature of predation. Not all hunters kill. Some simply establish dominance. She manipulated the display controls with surprising delicacy, her massive claws dancing across interfaces designed for human fingers. The tactical view shifted, highlighting the fortress's weapon signatures and patrol patterns. This is a mature hunting ground, she continued. The pirates have established territorial dominance through displays of strength. They do not expect to be challenged by someone higher in the predatory hierarchy. Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand what the Kithaerin was suggesting. You want to bluff them. Not bluff. Demonstrate superiority. Vexalia's mandibles clicked in what the crew had learned was her equivalent of a confident smile. They fear reputation more than weapons. My reputation precedes us. But you're just one Kithaerin against an entire battle station, David protested. Am I? Vexalia turned to study the young man with an expression that might have been amusement. Tell me, David Chen, what do you know of Kithaerin hunting packs? David swallowed hard. Every spacer knew the stories. Individual Kithaeron were nightmares made manifest, but when they hunted in groups, they could take down battle cruisers with nothing but coordination and raw savagery. Pack hunters never travel alone unless they're scouting for the main force, he recited from memory. Precisely. And what does the presence of a scout suggest to potential prey? The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're going to make them think you're the advance guard for a larger force. The possibility will be enough, Vexalia confirmed. Pirates are businessmen at heart. They calculate risk versus reward. The risk of facing Vexalia the Render is manageable, if expensive. The risk of facing a Kithaerin hunting pack is economic suicide. Lisa looked up from her sensor station, her face pale. They're hailing us. Standard pirate challenge, identify yourself and prepare for boarding. Sarah looked at Vexalia, whose 4 arms were already moving across her equipment harness with practiced efficiency. The Kithaerin had been preparing for this moment since they'd entered the system. Open a channel, Vexalia said. Visual and audio. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the Corsair fortress. The pirate commander was a hegemony deserter, his military bearing corrupted by years of easy prey and easier profits. Behind him, his crew represented a dozen different species, all of them predators who'd found that stealing was simpler than working. Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Crimson Tide territorial claims. The commander began in the bored tone of someone who'd delivered this speech countless times. Prepare to be boarded and... He stopped mid-sentence as Vexalia stepped into view. The effect was immediate and visceral. The pirate crew recoiled as if they'd been slapped. Someone on their bridge actually whimpered. The commander's confident expression crumbled into something approaching terror. I am Vexalia the Render, she said simply, her clicking speech carrying clearly across the communication channel. You will withdraw from this system immediately. This is Crimson Tide territory. The commander stammered, his authority evaporating like mist. We have salvage rights, mining claims. You have nothing, Vexalia replied. Her voice carried no anger, no threat, just absolute certainty. I have claimed this hunting ground for my pack. Your presence is no longer tolerated. The commander's face went gray as he processed the implications. A Kithaeron pack claiming territory meant they intended to hunt in the area for years, possibly decades. Any ships that remained would become prey, and nobody had ever successfully fought off a determined Kithaeron hunting force. Your pack? He managed. How many? Enough. Vexalia's mandibles clicked once, a sound that somehow conveyed infinite menace. You have 1 hour to clear this system. After that, we hunt. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge of the Hippocrates in stunned silence. Through the viewports, they could see the immediate effect of Vexalia's declaration. Fighter patrols were breaking off and returning to their carriers. The battle station's docking bays were cycling open as ships prepared for emergency departure. They're actually leaving, David breathed in amazement. Fear is the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, Vexalia observed, watching the tactical display as red hostile markers began disappearing one by one. Your species understands this instinctively, even if you refuse to acknowledge it. We don't use fear as a weapon, Sarah protested. Do you not? Vexalia turned to study her with those unsettling compound eyes. When your medical ships arrive at plague-stricken colonies, do the diseased not fear death? When you perform surgery, do patients not fear the knife? You weaponize their fear of suffering to make them accept your healing. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it as she realized the Kithaeron had a point. Fear wasn't always about violence. Sometimes it was about consequences, about the cost of inaction. That's different, she said finally. We use their fear to help them, not to control them. Is it different? Vexalia asked. Or is it simply predation with a different goal? The philosophical discussion was interrupted by Lisa's announcement from the sensor station. Last pirate ship just jumped to hyperspace. The system's clear. Through the viewports, New Prosperity was finally visible as more than just a emergency beacon. The colony was built into a massive asteroid, its surface dotted with mining installations and atmospheric processors. Even from this distance, they could see the signs of desperation. Darkened sectors where power had been cut, the telltale glow of mass crematoriums, the chaotic sprawl of refugee camps outside the main settlement. Take us in, Sarah ordered, and transmit our medical credentials to the colony administrators. Let them know help is finally coming. As the Hippocrates began its approach, Vexalia remained at the tactical station, studying the sensor readings with an intensity that made Sarah nervous. What are you seeing? She asked. Your human compassion has created something unprecedented, Vexalia replied. For the first time in my existence, I have used my reputation not to hunt, but to protect. Not to kill, but to preserve life. She paused, her mandibles clicking in a rhythm the crew had learned indicated deep thought. Among my people, such behavior would be considered madness. A predator that does not hunt is evolutionarily maladapted. Yet here I stand, having achieved victory without violence, having claimed territory not for myself, but for others. Sarah felt a sudden understanding of what the Kithaeron was going through. Everything she'd been taught, every instinct honed by millions of years of evolution, was being challenged by human concepts of cooperation and altruism. How does it feel? Sarah asked gently. Vexalia was quiet for a long moment, watching as the colony grew larger on their screens. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of wonder that no Kithaeron throat had ever produced. Powerful, she said simply. More powerful than killing. The docking bay of New Prosperity was a scene from a medical nightmare. Stretchers lined the corridors, carrying colonists in various stages of plague-induced delirium. The air recyclers couldn't quite mask the smell of death and desperation. Colony Administrator Hayes met them at the airlock, his face gaunt with exhaustion and relief. Dr. Chen, thank God you made it through, he said, grabbing Sarah's hands with trembling fingers. We'd given up hope. The pirates said they'd shoot down any ship that tried to run the blockade. The blockade is gone, Sarah assured him, gesturing toward where Vexalia was carefully maneuvering her bulk through the human-sized airlock. We had help. Hayes stared at the Kithaeron in stunned silence, clearly trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. Everyone knew the stories. Kithaeron didn't help humans. They hunted them. Administrator Hayes, Vexalia said formally, ducking her head to fit through the corridor ceiling. I am Vexalia. I travel with Dr. Chen's medical mission. You're the Render, Hayes whispered, his voice carrying a mixture of terror and awe. I am, Vexalia confirmed. And you are a leader who has kept his people alive through impossible circumstances. This earns my respect. The simple acknowledgement seemed to break something loose in Hayes's carefully maintained composure. We've lost so many. The plague started in Mineshaft 7, spread through the air recycling system. Without fresh medical supplies, we've been watching our people die one by one. Sarah was already opening her medical kit, her team spreading out to assess the most critical cases. But she noticed that Vexalia was studying the colony's infrastructure with the same intensity she'd shown the pirate fleet. Your mining operations, the Kithaeron said suddenly, they extend deep into the asteroid core? Hayes nodded, confused by the apparent change of subject. 7 levels down. Why? The plague originated in the deepest mines, Vexalia continued. Has anyone investigated the source? We sealed off the infected areas, Hayes replied. Standard quarantine procedures. But Vexalia was already moving, her massive frame navigating the colony corridors with surprising grace. Dr. Chen, I believe your medical supplies will treat the symptoms of this plague. But unless we address the source, it will simply return. Sarah looked up from the patient she was examining, understanding dawning on her face. You think the plague is environmental, not infectious. I think your people are being poisoned, Vexalia replied grimly. And whoever is responsible chose their timing to coincide with the convenient pirate blockade. The implications were staggering. If Vexalia was right, then the plague wasn't a natural outbreak at all. Someone had deliberately infected New Prosperity, then used the pirates to ensure no medical aid could reach the colony. Who would do such a thing? Hayes asked, his face pale with horrified realization. Vexalia's compound eyes reflected the colony's emergency lighting as her mandibles clicked in what the humans had learned was cold fury. Someone who wanted to acquire a valuable mining operation at a fraction of its worth, she said simply. Someone who calculated that a few thousand human lives were an acceptable cost for increased profits. Sarah felt her own anger building, a white-hot rage that surprised her with its intensity. This wasn't random piracy or natural disaster. This was calculated genocide, disguised as corporate acquisition. Can you prove it? She asked. Vexalia's mandibles clicked once more, and this time the sound carried a promise that made even Sarah's blood run cold. I am the greatest hunter in 3 sectors, she said simply. Give me something to hunt, Dr. Goal. Chen, and I will bring you proof. As the medical team worked to save the colony's dying, Vexalia prepared to do what she did best, but for the first time in her existence she would hunt not for personal satisfaction or territorial dominance, but for justice. And that transformation, Sarah realized, was perhaps the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to the corporate predators who thought they owned the galaxy. The descent into Mineshaft 7 felt like traveling into the galaxy's digestive system. Emergency lighting cast sickly shadows on the tunnel walls, while the air grew thicker with each level they passed. Vexalia moved ahead of the human team, her compound eyes adapting to the darkness far better than any artificial illumination could manage. Behind her, Sarah Chen and her children followed with portable medical scanners and atmospheric analyzers. Administrator Hayes brought up the rear, his face mask fogging with nervous breathing as they descended deeper than anyone had ventured since the plague outbreak began. Air quality is getting worse, Lisa reported, checking her scanner readings. Particulate matter is off the charts. Not particulate, Vexalia corrected, pausing to examine the tunnel walls with professional attention. Spores, bioengineered fungal organism designed to target human respiratory systems specifically. Sarah felt her stomach clench. She'd suspected biological warfare, but hearing it confirmed made the crime feel even more monstrous. How can you tell? My people evolved on a world where biological warfare was common, Vexalia replied, scraping a sample from the wall with one claw, Natural fungi adapt to multiple host species for survival. This targets only humans. It is artificial. They continued deeper, following the maintenance corridors that connected the main mining operations. The further they went, the more obvious it became that they weren't alone in the tunnels. Equipment had been moved recently. Tool marks on the walls were fresh. Someone had been working down here long after the official quarantine began. "There!" Vexalia said suddenly, pointing toward a side tunnel that didn't appear on Hayes's mining charts. Construction activity. Recent. The hidden tunnel led to a chamber that had been carved from the asteroid's core with military-grade excavation equipment. Banks of atmospheric processors lined the walls, their displays showing careful measurements of spore concentration and dispersal patterns. At the center of the room stood something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A massive fungal cultivation tank, its bioluminescent contents pulsing with artificial life. Feeding tubes connected it to the colony's air recycling system, while monitoring equipment tracked the exact concentration of deadly spores being pumped into New Prosperity's atmosphere. "Sweet merciful void," Hayes whispered, staring at the evidence of deliberate genocide. "Someone's been poisoning us for months." But Vexalia was already examining the equipment with the focused attention of a predator who'd found her prey's trail. Corporate logos marked each piece of machinery. Serial numbers provided manufacturing dates and purchase records. Most damning of all, a communication console showed recent transmissions to a source outside the system. "Nexus Biotechnology Corporation," she read from the equipment manifests. "Subsidiary of Titan Industrial Consortium, the same corporation that holds the mineral rights to the adjoining asteroid fields." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Titan Industrial had wanted New Prosperity's rich mineral deposits, but the colony had refused to sell. So they'd engineered a plague that would kill the colonists slowly, while making outside rescue impossible. Once the population was dead, they could claim salvage rights and strip mine the entire asteroid. "We need to document everything," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Evidence, witness testimony, communication records. We're going to expose these bastards to every court in the galaxy." "Courts require time," Vexalia observed, downloading data from the communication console with practiced efficiency. "Your colonists do not have time. Even with treatment, this level of exposure will kill most of them within days." "Then what do you suggest?" Vexalia turned to study the human woman who had somehow convinced a apex predator to become a protector. Her compound eyes reflected the tank's bioluminescent glow as she considered options that ranged from subtle to apocalyptic. "We end the source," she said simply, "and we ensure those responsible face consequences immediately." "You mean kill the people behind this?" Hayes said, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and horror. "I mean deliver justice." Vexalia corrected. "Your human legal systems are too slow and too corruptible for crimes of this magnitude. But there are older forms of justice, more direct ones." Sarah studied the Kitharan's expression, seeing something that hadn't been there before. Not bloodlust or the simple desire to hunt, but genuine moral outrage. The concept of using biological warfare against defenseless civilians offended something fundamental in Vexalia's warrior code. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "Titan Industrial's executives are currently aboard their flagship in the Kepler 439 system," Vexalia replied, accessing the communication logs. "They believe themselves safely distant from the consequences of their actions. I propose we demonstrate how small the galaxy becomes when someone earns the attention of Vexalia the Render." David looked up from where he'd been documenting the cultivation equipment. "That's 3 systems away. How do you propose we reach them before the colonists die?" Vexalia's mandibles clicked in what the crew had learned was anticipation. "We do not pursue them in your cargo hauler. We use my ship." The humans exchanged glances. None of them had actually seen the interior of Vexalia's vessel beyond the brief glimpse at Nexus Station. Kitharan ships were notorious for being biological nightmares designed around their owners' predatory needs. "Is it fast enough?" Lisa asked. "It is designed for pursuit," Vexalia replied. "No prey has ever escaped me once I begin the hunt." Hayes grabbed Sarah's arm with desperate fingers. "Dr. Chen, please. I know this goes against everything you believe about peaceful resolution, But these people are committing genocide. How many more colonies will they poison if they're not stopped? Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the evidence of calculated mass murder. The equipment here represented months of planning and millions of credits in investment. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was corporate policy implemented with cold efficiency. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked Vexalia. "We travel to their flagship. I demand formal combat challenge under Kitharan law. Their champion fights me in single combat. When I win, their leadership dies and their corporation faces dissolution under predator rights doctrine. And if they refuse the challenge?" Vexalia's expression became something that would haunt Sarah's nightmares. "Then I board their ship and hunt them through the corridors until justice is satisfied." The plan was insane, impossible, and completely outside anything Sarah had ever considered. It was also probably the only way to save New Prosperity's remaining population and prevent similar attacks on other human colonies. "There's one condition," she said, echoing the words she'd spoken at their first meeting. "I'm coming with you." "Dr. Chen, that's suicide," Hayes protested. "Kitharan ships aren't designed for human physiology. The acceleration alone could kill you." "Then I'll have to adapt," Sarah replied firmly. "If we're going to demand justice for genocide, someone needs to speak for the victims. Someone needs to make them understand the human cost of their greed." Vexalia studied her with an expression that might have been admiration. "You wish to witness the hunt." "I wish to ensure that justice, not just vengeance, is served," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference, is there?" Vexalia asked. "Your species makes many distinctions that seem arbitrary to a hunter. Justice, vengeance, punishment, consequences. Are these not all forms of predation with different names?" Sarah considered this as they began the long ascent back to the colony's main levels. Was there really a difference between justice and vengeance when dealing with crimes this monstrous? Did it matter what you called it when children were dying from artificially engineered plagues? "The difference is in the goal," she said finally. "Vengeance is about satisfying anger. Justice is about preventing future harm. And if the result is the same, then at least we know why we're doing it." The return to New Prosperity's medical center was a race against time made desperate by knowledge. Now that they understood the source of the plague, every moment of delay meant more deaths from deliberate poisoning. Sarah's team worked frantically to treat the most severe cases while Vexalia prepared her ship for a hunting mission unlike any she'd ever undertaken. "The atmospheric scrubbers should clear most of the spores within 72 hours, David reported, monitoring the air purification systems they'd installed throughout the colony. "But people who've been exposed for months are going to need intensive treatment. Treatment they'll receive," Sarah promised, making final adjustments to her portable medical kit. "But first we need to ensure the source can never threaten them again." Hayes approached her as she prepared to board Vexalia's ship, his face etched with gratitude and worry. "Dr. Chen, what you're doing, it's beyond anything we could have hoped for. But please, be careful. We can't lose you too." "You won't," she assured him, though privately she wondered if she was making promises she couldn't keep. Traveling aboard a Kitharan hunter-killer ship was dangerous under the best circumstances. Doing it while planning to confront a corporate flagship was probably suicidal. But the alternative was letting genocidal criminals escape consequences while other colonies suffered the same fate as New Prosperity. Vexalia's ship was even more alien than Sarah had imagined. The corridors were cramped and dark, designed for a species that preferred enclosed spaces and could see in near total darkness. The air was thick with humidity and carried chemical traces that made her human nose burn. Worst of all, the ship's acceleration couches were designed for beings with exoskeletons and 4 arms. "This is going to be uncomfortable," Vexalia warned as Sarah strapped herself into a hastily modified restraint system. "My ship accelerates at forces that would crush most species. Your human physiology is particularly fragile." "I'll manage," Sarah gritted out as the engines began their startup sequence. Around them, the ship's biomechanical systems came alive with sounds that seemed more organic than technological. The acceleration hit like a physical blow. Sarah felt her vision gray at the edges as G-forces pressed her deep into the alien couch. This wasn't the gentle acceleration of human vessels or even the aggressive thrust of military craft. This was predator speed, designed to chase down prey across interstellar distances. Through the crushing pressure, she could hear Vexalia moving with casual ease. her 4 arms dancing across control surfaces as she plotted their intercept course. For a being evolved on a high-gravity world, forces that would kill humans were merely energizing. "Target acquired," Vexalia announced as they dropped into hyperspace. "Titan Industrial Flagship Conquistador, approximately 18 hours at maximum pursuit velocity." Sarah tried to speak and discovered that breathing took all her concentration. She'd known this would be difficult, but the reality of traveling aboard a ship designed for predators was nearly overwhelming. "Rest, Dr. Chen," Vexalia said, noticing her distress. "Your species requires more recovery time than mine. When we reach our destination, you will need all your strength for what comes next." As Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness under the crushing acceleration, she found herself wondering if she'd made the right choice. Was justice worth risking her life? Was preventing future genocides worth confronting corporate predators in their own domain? Then she remembered the faces of New Prosperity's children, their lungs scarred by artificially engineered spores, and knew that some things were worth any risk. The hunt for justice had begun, and for the first time in galactic history, it was being led by a human doctor who had somehow convinced the universe's most feared predator to fight not for conquest, but for compassion. The executives of Titan Industrial were about to discover that their carefully calculated genocide had earned them the attention of something far more dangerous than government regulators or corporate rivals. They had earned the wrath of Vexalia the Render, and she was no longer hunting alone. The Titan Industrial Flagship Conquistador was a monument to corporate power made manifest in steel and plasma conduits. 3 kilometers of bristling weapons, luxurious quarters, and industrial-grade hubris hung in space above the mining platform, designated as Project 77 Alpha. From the observation deck of his private quarters, CEO Marcus Tatanson watched automated harvesters strip another asteroid down to its metallic core. "The New Prosperity situation should be resolved within the week," reported his chief operations officer, a thin man whose augmented eyes glowed with data streams. "Latest projections show complete population collapse by day 10, followed by standard salvage protocols." Titanson nodded without turning from the viewport. "Excellent. Make sure our claim jumpers are ready to move in the moment the quarantine lifts. I want full mining operations established before any government investigators arrive to complicate matters." "Sir," interrupted his communications officer, her voice tight with something approaching panic. "We're receiving a transmission. Priority Alpha emergency channel." "From whom?" "Unknown vessel," she replied, her fingers dancing across her console as she tried to trace the signal source. "Ship signature doesn't match anything in our database." "But sir, they're demanding to speak with you personally." Titanson finally turned from his contemplation of profitable destruction, irritation clear on his perfectly sculpted features. Corporate genetic therapy had given him the appearance of a classical hero, all sharp cheekbones and commanding presence. It was an image carefully calculated to inspire confidence in shareholders and terror in competitors. "Tell whoever it is to file a formal communication request through our legal department," he said dismissively. "I don't speak to random spacers." "Sir, I really think you should take this call," the communications officer insisted. "The ship, it's not showing up on our sensors. At all. But the transmission is coming from less than a kilometer away." That got Titanson's attention. Ships that could avoid Titan Industrial's military-grade detection systems were either government Black Ops vessels or something far more dangerous. "Put it through," he ordered, settling into his command chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd built an empire through careful control of every interaction. The main screen flickered to life, revealing what appeared to be the bridge of an alien vessel. The lighting was dim and reddish, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. But it was the figure at the center of the screen that made Titanson's carefully constructed confidence evaporate like mist. 9 feet of obsidian death regarded him through compound eyes that reflected no mercy whatsoever. 4 arms moved with predatory patience, while mandibles clicked in rhythms that spoke of barely contained violence. Behind the Kitharan, barely visible in the alien lighting, stood a human woman whose presence somehow made the scene even more terrifying. "I am Vexalia the Render," the creature announced in clicking, precisely enunciated Galactic standard. "You are Marcus Titanson, CEO of Titan Industrial Corporation." It wasn't a question. Titanson's throat felt suddenly dry, but decades of corporate warfare had taught him never to show weakness in front of adversaries. I am, and you are trespassing in corporate territorial space. I suggest you withdraw immediately before this becomes a legal matter. Vexalia's mandibles clicked once, a sound that somehow conveyed infinite amusement at human pretensions to authority. Legal matters, she repeated slowly, as if tasting unfamiliar words. Is genocide a legal matter, Marcus Tittenson? Is the deliberate poisoning of human children something to be resolved through corporate arbitration? The bridge of the Conquistador fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Every officer present turned to stare at their CEO, whose face had gone pale beneath his genetically enhanced tan. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, but his voice carried the telltale tremor of a liar caught in an inexcusable act. New prosperity colony? The human woman said, stepping forward into the light. Mining asteroid Kepler 442. See? Population 8,327 souls. You've been poisoning them with engineered fungal spores for 6 months. Sarah Chen's voice was steady, professional, and absolutely lethal in its quiet fury. Titanson recognized the tone from his own boardroom executions, but he'd never been on the receiving end before. That colony is under quarantine due to natural plague outbreak, he protested. Titan Industrial has no involvement with their unfortunate situation. Lies, Vexalia stated simply. We have examined your cultivation chambers. We have decoded your communication logs. We have witnessed your deliberate genocide firsthand. She paused, tilting her head at an angle that suggested she was considering which part of him to tear apart first. Under Kitharan law, you stand accused of crimes against a protected species. The penalty is trial by combat. You will select a champion to face me in single battle, or I will hunt you through your ship until justice is satisfied. Titenson's chief security officer, a former military commander whose augmented body was a testament to countless battles, stepped forward with his hand on his sidearm. Sir, we have a full regiment of security personnel aboard this vessel. Whatever this creature thinks it can accomplish. He never finished the sentence. Vexalia moved with the fluid grace that had made her a legend, and suddenly the security officer was pressed against the communications console, with 4 claws positioned over vital arteries. I am not this creature, she said conversationally, applying just enough pressure to draw droplets of blood. I am the apex predator of 3-star systems, the hunter who has never lost prey, the nightmare that makes pirates abandon entire sectors rather than face my displeasure. She released him and stepped back, allowing the man to collapse to his knees as he realized how close he'd come to death. Your soldiers are prey animals, she continued, addressing Titanson directly. Trained to fight others of your species, perhaps adequate against conventional threats. But I am not conventional. I am evolution's answer to the question, what kills everything else? Sarah watched the interplay with professional detachment, noting how quickly corporate arrogance could crumble when faced with genuine consequences. These people had calculated that distance and wealth would protect them from the results of their genocidal greed. They'd never considered that their victims might find someone willing to cross the galaxy to deliver justice personally. You cannot simply murder corporate executives, Titanson said, desperately trying to reassert some semblance of authority. There are laws, treaties, trade agreements, all of which become irrelevant when you commit genocide, Sarah interrupted. Titan Industrial forfeited any claim to legal protection the moment you decided that human lives were acceptable casualties for corporate profit. We never. Shut up, Sarah said, with such quiet authority that the CEO actually obeyed. I've spent 3 days treating children whose lungs were dissolved by your engineered spores. I've watched parents die knowing they'll never see their families recovered. I've documented every piece of evidence showing your corporation's deliberate, calculated mass murder. She stepped closer to the screen, her eyes burning with righteous fury. So don't you dare stand there and pretend this was anything other than genocide for profit. You killed thousands of innocent people because it was more cost-effective than legal acquisition. You turned children into weapons to terrify their parents into surrender. You created biological warfare specifically designed to cause maximum suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. Tittenson's composure finally shattered completely. "It was just business," he screamed. "They wouldn't sell. The mineral rights were worth billions, and those colonists were squatting on legally disputed territory. The admission hung in the air, like a confession at Judgment Day. Every person on both bridges understood that he'd just sealed his own fate with words that would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. "Just business," Vexalia repeated thoughtfully. "The systematic murder of an entire human population. Business." Her compound eyes seemed to fracture the light into 10,000 points of cold fire. "Dr. Chen," she said formally, "under human law, what is the appropriate punishment for genocide?" "Death," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Multiple death sentences, if such a thing were possible. And under Kitharan law, what is the fate of predators who hunt protected species?" "Elimination," Vexalia answered her own question. "Complete and immediate removal from the evolutionary chain." She turned back to face Titanson, whose carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him in real time. "You have two choices, Marcus Titanson. Face me in single combat, according to ancient law, or face me in your corridors, according to hunter's privilege. Choose quickly. My patience with corporate predators grows thin." "This is insane," Titanson protested. "I'm a businessman, not a warrior. I can't fight you in single combat." "Then select a champion," Vexalia replied. "Choose your strongest, your most skilled, your most dangerous warrior. Give them whatever weapons or advantages you desire. Make it a true test of whether your corporation deserves to survive." The bridge fell silent as everyone present realized what was happening. This wasn't a corporate negotiation or legal proceeding. This was primal justice, the kind that existed before governments and laws and treaties. The strong judging the weak, the predator deciding the fate of false apex species who'd forgotten that power without honor was just elaborate suicide. "And if I refuse both options?" Titanson asked desperately. Vexalia's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter if laughter could kill. "Then you learn why entire star systems pay tribute to avoid my attention," she replied. "You discover why pirates abandon profitable hunting grounds at the mere rumor of my presence. You understand in your final moments why the galaxy's most dangerous predators consider me the ultimate expression of their evolutionary ambitions." Sarah watched the corporate executive's face cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally acceptance of his situation. For the first time in his life, Marcus Titanson was facing consequences that couldn't be bought, negotiated, or litigated away. 1 hour, Vexalia announced. "Select your champion, choose your weapons, prepare your final arguments. In 1 hour, justice will be served aboard your flagship, witnessed by both our species." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Conquistador in chaos, as junior officers realized their corporate protections meant nothing against genuine predatory justice. Sarah settled back into the alien restraints of Vexalia's ship, watching as the Kitharan began preparing for combat with the methodical precision of a master craftsman selecting tools. "Are you certain about this?" she asked quietly. "Certain about which aspect?" Vexalia replied, checking the edge on each of her natural weapons. "That Titanson deserves death? That corporate genocide requires immediate consequences? That your species needs protection from predators who disguise themselves as businessmen?" "All of it," Sarah said. "The combat, the justice, the precedent we're setting." Vexalia paused in her preparations to study the human woman who had somehow convinced a apex predator to care about the fate of strangers. "Dr. Chen," she said formally. 6 months ago, I was an exile wandering the void with no purpose beyond survival. Today, I fight to protect innocent lives and punish those who profit from suffering. You have given me something I never knew existed, a cause worth dying for." She resumed her weapon maintenance, her forearms moving with deadly efficiency. "Corporate predators have grown soft, believing that distance and wealth make them untouchable. Today they learn that some hunting grounds have guardians, some prey species have protectors, and some crimes earn consequences that transcend law, politics, and profit margins. As they prepared to board the corporate flagship, Sarah realized that this moment would reshape the galaxy's understanding of justice, protection, and the price of predatory greed. The age of corporate immunity was about to end in blood and righteousness. The main cargo bay of the Conquistador had been hastily converted into an arena. Corporate security personnel had moved cargo containers to form crude stadium seating, while maintenance crews installed additional lighting to ensure every moment of the coming battle would be recorded for legal and historical purposes. Word had spread through the ship's communication network with the speed of wildfire. Off-duty personnel crowded into observation galleries, while bridge officers streamed the event to corporate headquarters and news networks across 3 sectors. This wasn't just a confrontation between individuals. It was a clash between 2 fundamentally different concepts of justice. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the makeshift arena, her medical kit ready to treat whatever survivors remained after the combat. Around her, Titan industrial executives whispered among themselves, their conversations a mixture of bravado and barely concealed terror. At the center of the bay, 2 figures prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of one of the galaxy's most powerful corporations. Marcus Tittenson had selected his champion well. Commander Zach Steele was a full-body combat cyborg, his organic components enhanced with military-grade armor plating and weapon systems. Standing 8 feet tall and weighing close to half a ton, he represented the pinnacle of human combat augmentation. Plasma cannons were integrated into his forearms, while his exoskeleton could withstand direct hits from anti-vehicle weapons. Opposite him, Vexalia the Render looked almost delicate by comparison. 9 feet of natural evolution, with no artificial enhancements beyond the simple equipment harness she wore. Her only weapons were the claws, mandibles, and tailblade that millions of years of predatory selection had perfected. "This is your final opportunity to reconsider," Tittenson announced from his position in the observation gallery. "Commander Steele is undefeated in 17 campaigns. He's designed specifically to eliminate threats like you." Vexalia turned to regard the corporate CEO with compound eyes that reflected the arena's harsh lighting. "Threats like me? Alien predators who think they can intimidate civilized species," Tittenson replied, his confidence returning now that his champion stood ready. "Commander Steele has eliminated Kitharon raiders before. You're not as unique as you believe." Something shifted in Vexalia's posture. The predatory patience that had marked all her previous interactions disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. Sarah had seen this transformation once before, when the Kytheran had faced the Brugger slavers at Nexus Station. But this was different. This was personal. "You compare me to raiders," Vexalia said, her clicking speech carrying new harmonics that made everyone present unconsciously step backward. "Pirates and scavengers who prey on the weak and defenseless." She began circling Commander Steele, her movements flowing like liquid death. "I am not a raider, Marcus Tittenson. I am not a pirate, or scavenger, or opportunist. I am the nightmare that hunts nightmares. I am the predator that makes apex species reevaluate their position in the food chain." Commander Steele raised his plasma cannons, targeting systems painting Vexalia with crimson dots as she moved. "Combat protocols initiated," he announced in a voice distorted by cybernetic vocal cords. "Target acquired. Termination sequence authorized." "Your champion speaks like a machine," Vexalia observed to Tittenson. "How appropriate. You have replaced his humanity with weapons and armor, just as you have replaced your own conscience with profit margins and market projections." The first plasma blast illuminated the cargo bay like artificial lightning. Vexalia flowed around the superheated bolt with movements that seemed to defy physics, her exoskeleton gleaming as energy passed harmlessly through the space she'd occupied microseconds before. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, filling the air with the ozone smell of ionized particles. But Vexalia was no longer where the targeting computers expected her to be. She moved like liquid shadow, like a living embodiment of entropy itself. "Impossible," Commander Steele growled, his enhanced reflexes struggling to track a target that seemed to exist in several places simultaneously. "Combat algorithms cannot compensate for this level of mobility. Your algorithms assume predictable behavior," Vexalia replied, closing the distance with fluid grace. "They calculate probable movement patterns based on previous data. But I am not previous data, machine man. I am something your corporate minds cannot quantify." She struck with all 4 arms simultaneously, each limb targeting a different component of Steele's defensive systems. Plasma cannon barrels shattered under precisely applied force. armor joints buckled where natural weapons found microscopic weaknesses. The combat cyborg staggered backward, his technological advantages negated by opponent who fought like a force of nature itself.
Primary weapons offline, Steele reported to his controllers, his voice carrying the first hints of uncertainty. Switching to secondary armaments. Missile pods opened along his shoulders, filling the air with micro-explosives designed to saturate the target area with deadly fragmentation. The cargo bay echoed with dozens of detonations as smart munitions sought their elusive prey. When the smoke cleared, Vexalia stood untouched in the center of the destruction, her compound eyes reflecting the fires that now burned along the arena's edges. Around her, the deck plating was scorched and cratered, but she herself showed no signs of damage. "You fight with the weapons of prey animals," she observed, beginning her final approach. "Ranged attacks, area denial, technological force multipliers, all designed to kill from a safe distance." Commander Steele drew his ceremonial combat blade, a monomolecular edge powered by contained plasma. It was a weapon capable of cutting through battle tank armor, the last resort of a warrior who'd exhausted all other options. "I am a predator," Vexalia continued, her mandibles clicking in rhythms that spoke of ancient hunting songs. "I close with my prey. I look into their eyes as life departs. I earn my kills through skill, courage, and the perfect application of natural force." The final exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Commander Steele lunged with augmented speed, his plasma blade seeking Vexalia's center mass. But she was already moving, flowing around his attack like water around stone. Her primary claws found the gap between his helmet and neck armor, while her secondary arms gripped his weapon hand and applied pressure in directions that no joint was designed to accommodate. The plasma blade clattered to the deck as Steele's enhanced arm was separated from his body in a spray of hydraulic fluid and artificial blood. He staggered, his remaining systems struggling to compensate for catastrophic damage, but Vexalia was already behind him. Her tail blade, razor-sharp and perfectly positioned, found the gap where his spinal column met his brainstem. Commander Steele, undefeated champion of Titan Industrial, collapsed to the deck like a marionette with severed strings. The cargo bay fell silent except for the hiss of escaping atmosphere from damaged bulkheads and the whispered prayers of corporate executives who were beginning to understand their situation. Vexalia stood over her fallen opponent, studying the mixture of organic and artificial components that had comprised his enhanced body. When she looked up toward the observation gallery, her compound eyes held no satisfaction, no triumph, only cold purpose. "Your champion fought with honor," she announced to Tittenson. "He faced death courageously, even knowing he was outmatched. This earns my respect." She paused, her gaze shifting to focus on the corporate CEO whose arrogance had condemned thousands of innocent people. "You, however, have earned nothing but contempt. You hide behind others while profiting from genocide. You create weapons to fight your battles while your hands remain clean of blood." The arena's lighting seemed to dim as Vexalia began climbing toward the observation gallery where Titan Industrial's leadership waited. Corporate security personnel raised their weapons, but their hands trembled as they faced a predator who had just demonstrated the futility of technological advantages. "Stand down!" Tittenson ordered desperately. "All security personnel stand down immediately." "A wise choice," Sarah Chen said, stepping forward from her position at the arena's edge. Throughout the combat, she'd been documenting everything, building an unassailable record of corporate genocide and its consequences, though wisdom comes rather late in this particular situation. Tittenson turned to her with the desperation of a man who'd suddenly realized that wealth and power meant nothing against genuine justice. "Chen, please, you're a healer, a humanitarian. Surely you don't approve of this violence." "I approve of stopping genocide," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I approve of ensuring that corporate predators face consequences for mass murder. I approve of protecting innocent lives from monsters who disguise themselves as businessmen." She gestured toward where Vexalia was approaching with implacable purpose. "6 months ago, you made a calculated decision that human lives were acceptable casualties for increased profit margins. You engineered a plague specifically designed to cause maximum suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. You condemned thousands of people to death by biological warfare because they refused to sell their homes.
Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd witnessed the consequences of corporate evil firsthand. Today, you face judgment from a being who represents everything your species was before it learned to hide behind laws and money and artificial constructs. Pure predatory justice, uncompromised by politics or profit. Vexalia reached the observation gallery, her massive frame somehow fitting through the human-sized access portal. The corporate executives pressed backward, desperate to maintain distance from a creature that represented their worst evolutionary nightmares. Marcus Tittenson, she said formally, you stand convicted of genocide, biological warfare, and crimes against a protected species. Under Kitharan law, the sentence is immediate termination. Wait, Tittenson pleaded, his corporate composure completely shattered. There must be something we can negotiate. Reparations, compensation, corporate restructuring. There is, Vexalia replied, pausing in her approach. One thing. Hope flickered in Tittenson's eyes. Name it. Whatever you want, whatever will satisfy your sense of justice. You will personally travel to New Prosperity. Vexalia continued. You will look into the eyes of the children you poisoned. You will tell their parents that their suffering was just business. You will explain to the survivors why their dead families were acceptable casualties for corporate profit. The hope died as Tittenson realized what she was truly offering. And then, he whispered. Then I will hunt you through the colony corridors, Vexalia replied simply. And you will die knowing that your victims had the satisfaction of watching justice delivered personally. The corporate CEO's legs gave out, depositing him on the deck as he finally understood that his empire was ending not in boardroom acquisitions or hostile takeovers, but in primal consequences for predatory behavior. Dr. Chen, he pleaded, turning to the human woman who represented his last hope of survival. Please, you must understand. It was just business. We never intended. You intended exactly what happened, Sarah interrupted. You planned, funded, and implemented genocide for profit. The only thing you didn't intend was facing consequences for your actions. She turned to address the corporate executives who were recording every moment of their leadership's downfall. Titan Industrial Corporation is hereby dissolved under predator rights doctrine, she announced with the authority of someone who'd become the voice of human justice. All assets will be liquidated to provide compensation for New Prosperity survivors and medical aid for future plague victims. All personnel involved in the genocide project will face trial under both human and Kitharan law. You can't do this, one executive protested. We have legal protections, corporate charters, government contracts. You had those things, Vexalia corrected, her mandibles clicking with dark amusement. Past tense. When you chose to commit genocide, you forfeited any claim to legal protection. When you decided human lives were acceptable business expenses, you marked yourselves as legitimate prey. She turned back to Tittenson, who was still collapsed on the deck in the ruins of his corporate empire. You have 1 hour to record final messages to your families, she said with something approaching mercy. Use the time to explain why corporate predators sometimes face consequences that transcend law, politics, and profit margins. As corporate security began the systematic arrest of genocide conspirators and news networks broadcast the fall of one of the galaxy's most powerful corporations, Sarah found herself standing beside the universe's most feared predator as she contemplated the implications of what they'd accomplished. Do you think this will change anything? She asked quietly. Vexalia considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had marked all her interactions with human philosophy. Your species has shown me that predators can choose to protect instead of hunting for personal gain, she replied. Perhaps corporate predators will learn that some hunting grounds have guardians now. Some prey species have found protectors willing to cross the galaxy to deliver justice personally. She paused, watching as the last of the corporate executives were led away in restraints. But more importantly, you have taught me that being the universe's most feared predator means nothing if that fear is not used to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Today, for the first time in my existence, I hunted not for survival or territory, but for something your species calls righteousness, Sarah nodded, understanding that they'd witnessed something historically significant. The moment when one of the galaxy's most dangerous beings chose to become a guardian rather than a threat. The day when corporate immunity died in blood and righteousness. What happens now? She asked. Vexalia's compound eyes reflected the lights of the corporate flagship as it prepared for new ownership under human medical administration. "Now we return to new prosperity," she said simply. "We ensure the survivors receive the treatment they need. We document every aspect of this case so that other colonies know they are not defenseless against corporate predators." She paused, her mandibles clicking in what Sarah had learned was anticipation. "And then we find the next group of innocent people who need protection from those who mistake wealth for immunity from consequences." As they prepared to depart the ruins of Titan Industrial's flagship, Sarah realized that her simple mission to deliver medical supplies had evolved into something far more significant. She'd somehow convinced the universe's most feared predator to become its most dedicated protector. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had found something more powerful than weapons, more effective than laws, and more terrifying than military might. They had found a guardian who hunted those who preyed upon the innocent, and that guardian no longer hunted alone. The age of corporate immunity was over. The age of protected humanity had begun, and it would be enforced by a being who had learned that true apex predation meant ensuring that the strong protected the weak, rather than simply consuming them. Marcus Titanson's final message to his family was brief. "I learned too late that some lines should never be crossed. Some prey species have guardians, and some predators are more dangerous than death itself." An hour later, justice was served aboard the corporate flagship, witnessed by both species and broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to all who might confuse profit with immunity from consequences. The universe's most fearsome creature had found her true purpose, not as a hunter of the innocent, but as the guardian of those who chose compassion over conquest, healing over harm, and justice over mere survival. And humanity had gained something they'd never possessed before, a protector who would cross the void itself to ensure that their kindness would never again be mistaken for weakness.